I'm Drew.
And I'm Tony.
And this is Back for Our Future, the show that goes, well, I went too soon, the show that goes back to talk about our past, but our future and yours. It's another great episode that I've seen a little snippet of the movies coming up that we've listed out in this, because a lot of times we have these show notes, just inside baseball folks. And Tony and I were just laughing right before we went live where the whole thing was, the exact line was, it's become painfully obvious that I've seen more movies than you. And that is very accurate. We had some good laughs about that. Yes, I some of these I don't remember. Some of them I do. Luckily, we have a historian with us, and that's one of the great things that Tony does well. Tony, how has the start of your year been? And before we get into the show, has anything stood out to you that you saw last year, maybe something from 2024? Anything stand out to you that's still sitting with you, and maybe a movie that you really enjoyed last year?
There was quite a few of them that I enjoyed last year. But yeah, nothing. I mean, off the top of my head, I didn't expect you to ask me that.
Probably because you saw 6,000 movies last year.
Yeah, it becomes tough to just pick one after.
Yeah, it is hard.
But yeah, I saw some good stuff. I mean, like I liked a bunch of different things, such as I enjoyed the Saturday Night Live movie, Saturday Night.
Oh, can we just take a second to say how great that movie is?
Yeah, no, I liked that a lot, and that was something kind of cool because I all kind of into the Saturday Night Live 50th anniversary special that's coming up and things like that, which I think this episode drops right around that. So yeah. Kind of. But yeah, I like that. I liked, we've talked about My Old Ass and some.
I loved it. I loved it so much. Yeah.
So those are smaller movies that didn't really necessarily click huge at the box office that people should kind of catch up on, I think.
And that's one of the things I love about us doing this podcast is whether it's, in this case, we're talking about some movies from, we're into a new year here, but we're talking about movies from 94. But the idea being that a lot of this stuff is fascinating to me because it still holds true. There's smaller movies that came out in the past that you may have missed or need to go back and watch, or there's newer stuff, and every once in a while we might reference those. But it's just fun to be able to have these discussions. One other piece of housekeeping I wanted to mention before we get – I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, real quick. The other movie is Nosferatu as well.
I heard it was fantastic.
And why I bring that up is because it has very much kind of, and we've talked about this movie quite a bit on the show. It has a very Bram Stoker's Dracula kind of feel to it. The colors and the coloring in the movie is a little bit different, the color palettes and stuff, but it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's on my list. I probably won't be able to catch it in theaters, but it's definitely on my list. Just based on people like you that I know that have seen it and been like, oh man, it's got this sort of old school vibe, which is interesting that Eggers, the director, is able to do that. Robert Eggers has a really good sort of like classic cinema language that I think is important because a lot of the movies we reference throughout the show from this time period have a very specific tone in which they're told. And I feel like sometimes in more modern cinema, we've lost that. So I think it's a great moment to take the present and go back to the past and do that lovely juxtaposition. The other thing I was going to mention is I will share the link. I found a video that talks about Steven Spielberg directing 2 movies. Now, this is, of course, from 1993. It talks about his experience directing Jurassic Park and then juxtaposing that against Schindler's List. And some of the history that comes, I did not know that movie was in development for him for 10 years, Schindler's List, that is. And anyway, I'll share the video. It was really well done essay, and it's really well made, and it's not biased. It's not attacking anybody. And it uses a lot of really cool old interview clips and stuff, and I'll share it with you. I thought it was a really cool take considering we just came out of 93, and it was fascinating being fresh in my brain.
It's so different. Those movies are just so different.
And he talks about it.
Yeah, I love that. It means you have to be in a totally different mindset as a director just to do either one of those films.
Yeah. He talks to anyway, it's really cool stuff. All right, I'll share that on the social. If you guys haven't been there, there's the Facebook page is just such a great little resource of fun. Whether it's nostalgia you're after or learning something new, it's there. It's fantastic. Now, let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 1994. It is January 7th. We got a couple of movies. One of these, I remember it being very big on Tony's list for a long time. A lot of references were made from it, if I'm not mistaken. But there's two of them, and the first one is not that movie. The second one will be that movie, but the first one is a movie called The Air Up There, which I
Yes.
believe is a
Say,
basketball
say,
movie.
this is a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon type film right here. You can get your 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon done on this film right here. Yeah, it's good. I mean, listen, it was directed by Michael Paul Glazer, who played Starsky on Starsky and Hutch. So that's kind of a cool thing, right?
Yeah,
Uh, and it's a fun sports comedy film. Where uh, Kevin Bacon is trying to find the next big um, basketball player, and he goes over and he goes across the way and tries to find the hidden gem player and finds somebody. So it's kind of a cool thing. So he like travels to Kenya to find this massively huge basketball player that is played by an actor nobody's really seen since. So
I was actually hoping you would say he was, like Dikembe Mutombo's cousin or somebody that like came from that side of the world. But like, what an interesting idea, because later on we get, what is the gentleman's name? Is it Yao Ming? What is the guy's name? That's the Chinese national that's so tall.
yeah, Yao Ming is yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's kind of based off of a lot of different players at the time. There was quite a few guys like Dikembe Mutombo who would even play at Georgetown and Alonzo Mourning and those kinds of guys. There was back in the '90s. It was very the basketball in general was very center oriented. So it's different nowadays where everyone's shooting 3 pointers. Back then it was more about playing in the paint. So this movie is very much a sign of the times because now
is
they'd be
it?
looking for like some guy who can blaze up and down the court and shoot 3 pointers.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of those things of like, we're getting into that. This is, in my opinion, this is some of the greatest. This is these years, 92 to 94, 96, somewhere in there. This is some of my favorite years of professional basketball. We had a lot of great big personality players. I know that's your jam.
These are my favorite years because this is Patrick Ewing mania right here. This
Yep.
is the New York Knicks. These are my Knicks teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a long-standing thing. Like, I never really had a basketball team, only by proxy, and my basketball team was always the Knicks, because my best friend was a Knicks fan, and what I knew about basketball, I learned from him. So I learned it playing basketball I guess up at my house. And the downside, did we play? Did I have my basketball goal at my house? Right, and
Yeah.
so the worst part about playing basketball where me and Tony lived, Tony's house was built on Tony's house was built level and then had like a basement, sort of like a lower level type scenario, right? It didn't really have a basement, but it was like a ranch out, like in the Midwest they would call it a ranch out or ranch basement type scenario, right? And the pool was down. So like if we played basketball at the bottom of his driveway, it was fine. The ball didn't go anywhere. My house was on a hill that if you hit the rim wrong, that basketball rolled all the way
All,
to the bottom
yeah.
to Tony's house,
Yeah.
like all the way down the hill.
Yeah, it was funny because we lived right across the street from each other. So yeah, the basketball would literally roll all the way down the hill, and not we're not fast enough to catch it, of course. But yeah, so then we started to play basketball with then the kids next door to us, and that's not in 1994. That's going to be a little bit later. But the
Yeah.
kids next to us are going to put up a basketball goal in the street, and we're going to play on that because we don't want to chase the ball down the hill.
It was a lot of time running down a hill very carefully and then walking your very sad ass back up that hill slowly.
It's a lot of exercise, though. We probably need it to this day.
Fair point. Very fair point.
No, I do.
All right.
I don't,
I'm with you. So the Air Up There, how does that movie end up doing in theaters? Because the basketball craze was pretty big in this window. Does it do okay in terms of box office and all that good stuff?
it was like it ended up breaking even and going to making a little bit of money. I mean, it was like a $17 million film, made like 21 million, which at the time was fine, not a huge hit, but it did okay. And of course, we got secondary markets, like I've always preached on the show. I mean, they're huge at this point. So, if your movie's making more than your production budget in theaters, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that leads us over, unless there's anything else you want to touch on. I was going to lead us into what I consider to be a Tony classic.
It's a good movie, man.
It is a great movie, and that is the film Cabin Boy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I at the time we're kind of in this Chris Elliott era, and just Chris Elliott era, and he's done the classic Groundhog Day, and he's worked on David Letterman and all this stuff, and he comes out with this very weird fantasy comedy called Cabin Boy, and it's got him and it's got Brian Doyle Murray, who's Bill Murray's brother, and James Gammon from Major League, and Brian James, and all this weird cast, and it's kind of this brilliant little film that didn't do very well, but and it's kind of obscure in a lot of ways, but has a lot of great one-liners, and I do mean a lot of great one-liners. Do not make me recite all of them, but it's a funny movie.
The great thing about it is this is also we're for those of you that may not remember or maybe are too young or again too old to have cared. We are entering, because of the music scene and everything else culturally, we're entering this pop culture era of like really the alternative concept was really bleeding into a lot of stuff. So a movie like Cabin Boy is, in my opinion, a very alternative type movie. And I don't mean like alternative in terms of anything more than just kind of weird and quirky. And so they start getting edgier and different, but none of it like in a blatant, gross out way. It was always like right on the edge. Everything lived right on the edge because of standards and practices or whatever. But this is one of those movies. It's just a quirky, as Tony said, it's just a quirky, weird film that that has probably been forgotten by a lot.
Yeah,
I have not seen it in years.
tough to
But
find films. These are the films that are tough to find nowadays.
that's
Like if
right.
you don't have this, if you didn't get this on DVD or when it was out or VHS or something like that, these are tough films to find now. I mean, they're all out of print, and it's kind of scary because I mean, it's 2025. You would think you'd have access to everything at this point, but we're losing a lot of stuff in this era, and I mean, we don't realize it, but it's been 31 years. I mean, it's a long time in theory. It's kind of funny because when we're back in 1994, it'd be like trying to find something from 1963.
Right. Right. It's
So
a
it's
good point.
kind of crazy in a lot of ways. And one of the cool things about this movie too that I don't think anyone knows, but this movie was also directed. I mean, not directed, but produced by Tim Burton.
What?
It was. It was.
That's insane.
You can see a little bit of that in it as you watch it because Tim Burton's he's got the very fantasy driven stories and stuff like that, and so it's produced by him. It's not directed by him or anything, but it's produced by him. It was actually directed by Adam Resnick, who worked with Chris Elliott when they were at David Letterman. They were
Got
good
it.
buddies. Yeah.
Again, good quirky little film. Not necessarily mainstream at all. Unlike the next movie, which is the third of I don't know how many versions of this movie they've made, but the first one was a massive hit, and I'm talking about House Party 3, which I don't even know if it stars Kid and Play or not. I have no idea at this point.
Yes.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. House Party 3 is one of those movies where we've all seen House Party. I think everybody is probably from this generation has seen House Party in some capacity. I don't know if everybody saw House Party 2, and I really don't know about House Party 3, to be honest with you.
So there's some interesting things going on with this movie, right? So first of all, you got Kid and Play, who I always really liked back in the day. They're kind of like the '90s version of like LMFAO. If
Right.
I had to compare him to somebody, I mean, LMFAO's been on hiatus for a long time, so they're not really brand new, but they're kind of that thing, and it's kind of cool. I mean, the cast was like Bernie Mac, who's the late Bernie Mac, and the late Gilbert Gottfried, and TLC's in the movie again. But one of the cool things about this one that's different than the first couple of house parties is that you get the first appearance of Chris Tucker on film.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so he's in this. So you get the first appearance of Chris Tucker. We do lose Martin Lawrence, who was a mainstay for the first two films. There was like two of his bigger films at the time, and so Martin Lawrence isn't even in this movie. He's not mentioned or anything like that. It's kind of weird because he's such a huge character in the first two. But
Right.
uh, but yeah, I mean, the house party movies were fun. I always enjoyed them. I used to see them more like they were like far more video rentals for me. But I did enjoy them quite a bit. I mean, House Party 3 not as good as the first two. The first two are bigger hits, and by we're starting to see the franchise like dip down, dip down, dip down, and of course they remake it a couple of years, about a year and a half ago. They kind of rebooted it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where it's one of those things where, the first one, if it stood alone, it would probably be, and it's probably arguably for a lot of people a classic, but when you start, as we've talked about specifically, you've brought this up very well. It's really hard to make sequel comedies, and this is another example of that unfortunate scenario. And by the way, this is January 12th when that movie comes out, but it's an interesting thing that. It's one of those movies where I know the name, I know the first one, I don't remember anything past that. It's one of those unfortunate lost to time scenarios for me. I will say though that when we get into January 14th,
But
a movie
we're,
comes. Yeah, go ahead. Go
we're
ahead. I'm sorry.
about the other notable thing about House Party 3
Yeah.
is that this is going to be the last original material released by Kid and Play on the soundtrack.
Oh, I didn't realize that's interesting.
Yeah, so this is going to be the last time they release original material. So that's kind of cool if you were a fan of them.
Yeah.
This is the last time they released original material, which they always did original material for the soundtracks for these movies, and this would be the last of it. So kind of cool.
It is kind of cool. Yeah, I have a I guess I'm assuming, like, if you guys haven't seen the last episode, you should go back and watch me make a huge mistake about another movie's title. And so now I'm always a little gun shy. I believe this next movie that comes out on January 14th is stars Ethan Hawke. Is that correct?
That's incorrect.
Oh, see, I didn't get it. All right, go ahead then. Correct me on this scenario.
So this
Tee up
is
the movie then.
so the movie's called Iron Will, and there is an Ethan Hawke movie that's very similar to this in a lot of ways. This one, this one is about the 1917 dog sled race in Winnipeg, and they shot this movie in Minnesota. Kind of notable because we get Kevin Spacey will be in this one.
Okay.
We get Mackenzie Austin, who you're confusing with Ethan Hawke. They
Yep.
look
There we
similar.
go.
And David Ogden Stiers who played Winchester on MASH will also
Yep.
be in this. Kind of a cool movie. I mean, I always liked these types of films. I mean, I was always fascinated about them shooting in just extremely frigid, cold weather in Minnesota, and kind of a neat thing to see it on film. It was not by any means a huge hit. It did like over 20 million at the box office, but you know, I enjoyed it. Mackenzie
I did
Austin was
too.
at the time. He was a decent actor at the time. We don't really see him these days. So
But see, I guess that's where I confuse it because I knew it was about the dog sled portion. I just don't know why I put Ethan Hawke in that, but I do remember the dog sled side of it, and I remember the same thing. The story of it was as a young guy, I liked it. I resonated with this concept. And again, it's been a while since I've seen it clearly, but I remember really enjoying that movie, and I remember there's a tie to this movie with my younger cousin named Wade. And Wade grew up like another brother to me, like almost like another biological, if you will, brother, in the sense that his dad was not necessarily the top tier guy, but in terms of his relationship with his wife. So basically, me and my cousins grew up very close, and we've talked about Wade before on the show. But I remember Wade really liking the show. He was a kid at this time, and he liked it. So of course I liked it because I remember seeing it with him. Probably a rental, but I do remember this movie a good bit. And I think that's why I have some fondness for it.
Yeah,
what is the one I'm thinking of with Ethan Hawke? What is that
I
movie?
think you're thinking of the movie White Fang,
You sure are correct, sir.
and that actually comes out before this by a few years. It came out in '91, but it was also it's very funny if you look at the video boxes for these two films. They're very similar in a lot of ways.
So
So
it's
if
not 100% my fault, is what you're saying.
I mean, if you look at the video boxes, you would be like, "Oh, that could be that movie," but it's not. But it could be. Just like you mixing up, Ghost in the Shell and Ghost in the Machine last episode. That's okay. It happens. That's why I'm here. By the way, that's my whole purpose.
Uh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Anyway, do you have anything else about that movie? Is there any kind of crazy facts about that at all? Aside from we know what it's like to film in frigid temperatures, and let me tell you guys, if you think it's fun to stand in the snow, freezing your butt off, then let me tell you, you should go look for movies that are filmed in the snow so you can freeze your butt off. Is there anything else you need to add to
Nothing,
this?
nothing too crazy. I mean, I, I just kind of thought it was neat how they shot that in Minnesota, which a lot of people I know shoot in Minnesota for snow. So not odd. It's not an odd thing, but kind of cool.
Not for me. That's too cold for me.
I don't. It's not something I want to do either because me, man. I love to be in shorts and sandals and stuff. And so I mean, I prefer to be in shorts and stuff, but I'll still be out in shorts in 30-degree weather. But when it starts becoming under zero, you gotta put some long pants on if you're gonna be outside, bud.
Was it Mystery Men? You might want to put some pants on if you want to keep fighting crime. It's Tony in the wintertime. That's a true story about him in the shorts. People don't understand that reality of situation.
Oh yeah.
So we're going into January 21st. 1 week later, here we are, January 21st. A movie called Intersection comes out. I can't even pretend like I remember anything about it. I want you maybe if you talk about it, but I have no idea what this movie is. I want to say for some reason I keep seeing Rosanna Arquette, but I do not think that is accurate whatsoever.
You're not correct. You gotta stop doing that. I mean, you just get yourself in trouble. No, but it is two lovely ladies though. It's going to be Sharon Stone and Lolita Davidovich and
Ooh.
Richard Gere, which I was very fascinated by this movie when I knew it was coming out because when you watch the trailer, it looks like it's going to have more of a thriller element to it. And that's not really what this film is. That's okay. It's not a bad movie. It's a good movie. It's kind of like it's a romantic drama. Basically, he's torn between these two women, one being his wife, one being his lover, and he's got to make a choice, and he's at an intersection. So that's what that's. It's a play on words, and yeah, it's a good movie. I mean, I saw it with my mom, Carmike 10. And I liked Lolita Davidovich a ton, Sharon Stone, and obviously, and she liked Richard Gere. So yeah, I thought it was kind of a cool movie, but it's not one of his thrillers. He was making a lot of those around this time frame. It's not Final Analysis, which I have now brought up on the show, what 10 times or so.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great movie though.
It's good. It's really good. Okay, so there we go. That kind of ties it up with Intersection.
And it did
Now
okay, by the way. It was
I was
like
going to ask. I was going to ask.
it was like $40 million movie, did like 61 million. So Richard Gere was still, very viable as a box office star at that point. Really still making good money.
It's just still so fascinating to me, and I hope everyone listening. We bring a box office because it's an interesting metric, but there's also a lot more to it. I think for Tony and I, and hopefully anybody else that appreciates cinema on that level, that movie was $40 million, and I think we said that Schindler's List was like 15 or
Yeah,
something. Like,
yeah,
it is really crazy when you consider those two. Not saying that one's better than the other. I'm not here to make artistic degradation of anyone. I am saying, though, that it is pretty fascinating that a period film that was very challenging to create, both emotionally, story-wise, and structurally, is 15 mil. and wins an Oscar, and then here's a $40 million movie that gets released in January, which typically in the film world is a slower time to drop a film. It's just really interesting that actor salaries can drive up the budget that much
Yeah,
higher and higher.
big star power. You know,
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. People don't realize the actors above the line can bring up the budget a good bit. So
Yeah. It's a great reminder. So January 26th, this is a movie called Blink.
oh,
I think I know what it is. I'm going to let you talk about it. I I'm not even going to say anything else because I have thoughts if it is that one, and I'm not going to burn myself 3 times in one episode. It's just not happening.
so this is a thriller. This one is a thriller, directed by Michael Apted, and it stars Madeline Stowe and Aidan Quinn, and I was always a big fan of both. Um, and she's somebody who's has who's blind. She's blind, and she has these she has this cornea surgery that allows her to see, and she's in while these are trying to adjust in her eyes, they cause like hallucinations, and so you're going through this movie and you're trying to figure out what's the hallucination, what she's really being able to see and hear, and it's kind of a cool thriller. I mean, I always really enjoyed it. I think well, I know I did. I used to rip out these little ads out of these little magazines and put them up in my room, and this was one of them.
It's
But yeah, huge.
it is the same movie I was thinking of. Thank goodness it is. I remember I remember seeing this movie and then revisiting later. I loved it, and I loved it for a lot of reasons. I believe either she plays or there's a connection to the violin in this, and there's like it may have been just the soundtrack driven, but I remember there being this it could be just a soundtrack, but there was a musical element to this that really I connected with somewhere along the way. But I just remember the artwork was incredible. It was very modern. The artwork they did for the poster art and certainly when they pushed it out. But it was a really good thriller because it has that Hitchcockian sort of vibe to it where you're not totally sure. And as you guys have known, as we've talked about, some of the films that I, as a filmmaker, and that Tony ended up working with me on, a lot of the movies I really liked were like thrillers of that nature where you don't know what's real and what's not. And this is one of those prime examples of another really great one. Plus, she's fantastic. She's lovely, but she's a great actor. And Aidan Quinn is he's super good and creepy in this movie. It's a good film. It's a super solid movie.
Aidan Quinn, man, I always thought he was so underrated
Same.
as an actor because I love him in this, and I also just absolutely think he's marvelous in the movie Stakeout, where
Yeah.
he's the villain, and I just think he's a great actor. Like you can play these creepy type roles. There's an element about that with him I just think works, and that's just because he's just such a great actor. I mean, but yeah, he's good in this. This is a really underrated film that did pretty well. I mean, it made like 22 million on an $11 million budget. Wasn't too bad. I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about it, of course, or maybe didn't even see it. But yeah, it's a neat thriller directed by a guy who knows how to do thrillers. Michael Apted's very good at that. Of course, he would end up doing "The World Is Not Enough," James Bond movie. He
Yep.
would also end up doing another movie this year that's going to do well. It's not getting up on one of my favorites list, though. It's the movie Nell.
Oh no, I did
He
not
direct,
know that.
yes, he directed that. That comes out in December of this year. It's a long way away before we get to that.
Oh, there are stories in that. That is ooh, yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there for sure. Yeah, I think Blink is I'm just looking at the movies we've talked about. I think what's interesting to me is I love these. Now I love to go back and watch these quirkier movies where somebody was really trying something different. And even the couple of films we mentioned at the beginning from last year that we enjoyed are still considered quirky or smaller films. But I think if you look at Blink and Cabin Boy, we'll get to Tony's picks, of course. But if you're looking for something a little bit different, both those movies, the contrast between the two couldn't be greater. But you got two really interesting pieces of art. These are very much like not just cash grabs. They're very different movies that have very interesting ideas, and they explore stuff in a completely different way. Both very, very fun movies, at least in my opinion, especially Blink. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you, 100%.
So here we are, January 28th. Now, this is a classic remake, and I'm sure there's a great story tied into it. It feels like I'm sure there's stuff. I'll let you tell what you need to tell. But I remember this is based on a TV show that I remember my parents introduced me to, and because they enjoyed it, and it was part of probably their childhood to some extent. And this is the film adaptation version of, I don't want to say it's a remake. I'd rather say it's an adaptation, but of Car 54, Where Are You? And it's fun. It's a fun movie.
It is a fun movie. I mean, it's sometimes they just decide to. I don't know what it was, but especially in the '90s, they did a lot of these where they just in the '90s and early 2000s too, where they would remake these movies and they'd be kind of a caricature of the show, and that's what you're kind of getting here. I did enjoy the movie. It is a a kind of a reboot or just an adaptation, like you said, of the show that starred Fred Gwynn back in 1961, 63, and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was kind of fun. I mean, the cast is really good though, right? So you got David Johansen and John C. McGinley, and Fran Drescher, Nipsey Russell, Rosie O'Donnell's in it, Al Lewis, for Grandpa from the Munsters, and Daniel Baldwin, Jeremy Piven, Tone Loc. I mean, that's about as '90s as it gets right there.
Yeah, that's a pretty big '90s cast, and that's one of those things with these remakes is they were able to stack them with or not remakes, but these adaptations, like Tony said, they would take these old shows and just stack them with lots and lots of moments in them, and they're banking on the idea of nostalgia mixed with bringing in newer faces. Jeremy Piven's hot at the time. Tone Loc's hot at the time. You're bringing in all these different brand names, Fran Drescher, and you're bringing them all in, and you're banking on this idea of making something feel new and fresh. Yet you're still going to grab an older audience.
So one of the cool things about this is David Johansen, of course, was the lead singer for the New York Dolls, the old punk band, and so he was doing some movies around this time frame. Like he does this one. And he does a movie that I think is absolutely brilliant that came out before this called Let It Ride with Richard Dreyfuss, which I think is just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful movie. And then he gets a lot of his old punk buddies to be in this movie, which I think is kind of a fun thing to go watch if you have it. If you're into the punk scene, like the 80s, 90s punk scene, and you're into, the Ramones are in this. And Mojo Nixon is in this. And then they also have Penn and Teller, who's not a punk band, but they're kind of a sign of the times as well, and they're in this as well. So I think if you're interested in watching those old acts and this nostalgia of all that music and everything, it's a kind of a fun movie to go check out.
That is interesting to go back and be able to see. It is funny to think about the Ramones captured into a classic Hollywood. Is that the original lineup, the Ramones, too? Is that before they started having separations?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Oh, man, that's even better. I mean, you get to see all the guys. Obviously, we've lost a few of them, and they had different breakups over the years, but that's fun. That makes me curious. I may have to go dig around on that. Yeah.
Check it out for sure. I mean, it's a cool movie, but again, these become tougher to find.
Right.
It didn't do that well, and so that was the thing. Like, I mean, the show you got to remember the show only ran for a couple seasons, and it was in that early '60s period where they released a lot more episodes than they do now. Because you're getting 10 episodes on streamers and cable, and you're getting 22 episodes. But back then they do 30 or so, or more. So you get 2 seasons, you could have 70 episodes or so. But yeah, I mean, this was like an $11 million movie. It did like $2 million at the box office. So like when it doesn't do that, movies don't do that well. You get a lot of out of print stuff. It's harder to find them.
Yeah, that is a good point. That is a tricky one. You might be able to find some clips of it maybe on like YouTube. So any of these movies, if you just want to see clips, obviously trailers, but sometimes you can find a good clip here and there on YouTube. It's become one of my friends when I go back and look at some of these movies or try and remember a certain piece. Like I have to go look up whatever this musical connection I keep talking about in my brain about Blink is. I got to figure that part out. Um, but that's fun. It is interesting to hear all that punk stuff. I did not know that, so I think that's a great little tidbit to take away from. But the
No,
next move,
great.
I'm sorry.
No, I said I think it's great. I love getting to see that stuff.
The next movie that we're stepping into, is it fair to say before we say this that not only is this movie this wins Q1 quarter one, it's got to be unless I'm wrong, this could just be me being a kid and loving it. But did this movie not just explode at the box office?
Which one? The next movie?
The next movie on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge.
That's what I thought.
It's a huge movie.
So we're talking about Jim Carrey making his technical, not on-screen debut, but his first, maybe not even his first solo, because he did that vampire movie before this, didn't he?
Well, he's got other stuff that he'll pop up in other things, but this is like his big movie. His first big Jim Carrey comedies. This is the first one that gets it all started. And of course, we're talking about Ace Ventura: Pet Detective.
I mean,
Classic.
listen, it's one of the funniest movies. When we saw this, it was one of the funniest movies.
We saw this
I
together.
mean, okay, good. I thought we did, but it's one of those ones where he was on Mad TV at the time, right?
No, he's on In Living Color.
In Living Color, not Mad TV. I'm sorry. Yeah, in Living Color. He's on In Living Color at the time. He's doing Fire Marshal Bill and all these crazy characters. I remembered that my parents, to them rather, ironically, and I'm saying this on purpose, but they did. He was like Andy Kaufman. They just didn't get it. They just didn't get his sense of humor. Not to say that we don't. I'm obviously using that as a direct connection for later in his life and career, but my parents, they just didn't get it. They thought he was the dumbest guy they'd ever seen. And to us and so many others, so many young people, whether it was, college kids or just about, or anybody, we thought this was the funniest thing in the world. And it still is to me. I still find the comedy great.
Oh yeah.
And it's quotable throughout life. You're going to use, if nothing else, you're going to say, oh, righty then. You're going to do it at some point anywhere in there. Any of his bits, they're going to be tied back to this movie because you can see his characters kind of progress into this. He pulled them all from like Fire Marshal Bill into this kind of thing. But some of that zaniness, his hair, dude, the whole thing. What do you remember about us seeing this movie together? Because clearly my memory is like Swiss cheese.
Well, a couple of things to go back to some of the quotable stuff. One of the things that's in this movie that just pops up. I watch so much football. I watch so much football, so much of it, more than anybody else I know. But laces out
Yep.
is still the most classic thing, and you see it every single game. Every time they kick a field goal, every time I think of this reference. Every single time. I mean, it plays so big in this movie, and it's really quite hilarious. And you'll hear announcers reference it as being from this movie, even though it's just a standard thing you were supposed to do when kicking a field goal. But it's referenced so well in this film that really nobody thought about it, beforehand so much. But now it's something that if you've seen this movie, you know that the damn laces are supposed to be out when the kicker's kicking the football. The
It
holder
is.
is supposed to put the laces out. Yeah, okay, we got that now. But I mean, yeah, Jim Carrey to me was brilliant. I mean, he's still alive. He's still brilliant. But I mean, these early movies for him were just gold to me. And my dad didn't understand it either. He was not a fan of Jim Carrey. My mom was cool with him. My brother loved him, and I did too. And yeah, you and I saw this movie, and we went to Carmike 10, and we had a couple friends in tow. But yeah, we thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
I
it's right
mean,
in our wheelhouse.
yeah, it's just it, we loved quotable movies. You and I always did, and that's the thing about Jim Carrey and this film and just all his films. Really, I mean, for the next several movies are all so quotable, and that's why I loved him. I just thought he was quirky and fun and different.
And the craziest thing about it is you go back and you watch something like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and then years down the road, he's going to give you a performance, whether it's in Man on the Moon or even some of his later, even some episodic stuff. This show he did that was really heavy. He's just such a talented actor that he's like Tom Hanks essentially, where you had this goofy guy that had like a very lovable style. Jim Carrey's is a little more stylized than Tom Hanks per se, but they become these really sensible, thoughtful, emotive actors that are carrying these very heavy roles, but they all start with something really silly. And in Jim Carrey's case, this movie is the epitome of silly and fun. There's nothing higher.
Cool thing is he does the movie, and the director's Tom Shadyac, who's going to also direct him in Liar Liar and Bruce Almighty, two other classics.
Yep.
I mean, those are two great movies. You know, and he's got three. I mean, these two guys combined to do three great movies. I don't think people put these guys together in a way that they should. You know, because I mean, these are three great comedies.
Yeah, it's I love this movie. It's great. I've been waiting to my kids are there's a couple little things in it that maybe are a little more mature for my kids. I'm waiting for them to get to a spot because I can't wait to show it to them because it's such a dad for me. It's such a daddy movie to show them. I can't wait for them to finally sit down. And plus it's the whole idea that he saves pets. Like that's just the silliest thing. I don't remember how much further down the line, but they eventually even made a Saturday morning cartoon or somewhere along the line, they made a cartoon based on it.
Yep, they're gonna have the character. They're gonna have the cartoon as well. That's gonna come out like I think about a year later. It's gonna run for a couple of years, but yeah, they're gonna have the cartoon and they're gonna have a sequel.
Sequel's
They're gonna
good too.
sequel's
There's a
good.
scene. Yeah.
It's got the Cliffhanger reference, which is pretty great. I mean, the sequel's pretty awesome. We see that one together too. But I mean, the sequel's pretty amazing too. And a lot of this, again, we'll run across some of the same certain gags, but the sequel's different in a lot of ways,
Right.
which is a little bit uh, different than what I usually talk about when I talk about comedy sequels being very similar. It's similar in some capacities, but totally different story. Lots of different gags, referencing different movies. Like this one references just very epic crying game reference in this in this movie, and the other one's going to reference a lot of other types of movies. So that's kind of a cool thing that they did.
Yeah, what is the what's the so we were teeing it up like on the box office. This movie was a smash, like a smash.
It was, and yet it's still not going to be as big as some of the movies that he's going to release eventually. I mean, this is like a $15 million comedy, does like $108 million worldwide. That's still really great. And of course, I mean, everybody I know has seen this movie, and
Right.
I mean, or owns a copy of it or rented it. So I mean, the secondary markets were explosive. You know, I mean, and of course, when the second one came out, the second one was massive too,
Yeah.
really big.
It's a classic. I assume that the other movie that gets released on this day is a movie called My Father the Hero. I imagine it probably gets dwarfed a good bit by Ace Ventura's popularity, which is also interesting because again, we're still in Q1. And the reason I bring that up from a business standpoint is because, as we've mentioned, this is not normal. You don't see this a lot, but for that movie to do that well and probably have a theater stay that's tremendously long is really impressive. So, what do we get with My Father the Hero? Like, that's got to get butted up against that's a pretty ambitious push for a pretty decent movie.
It did pretty well, actually. You know, it did like 45 million at the box office, and it's directed by a guy who I got to AD with. It's directed by Steve Miner. So he's a director that I would end up working with. And this movie stars Gerard Depardieu and a very young Katherine Heigl, before she becomes like, you know, a rom com queen for a while. and it's a fun movie. I mean, her dad's trying to be in her life, and she's kind of pushing away, and this whole thing, and there's a lot of really funny moments that happen. I actually went on a date to go see this film.
It's a good date movie.
It is a good date movie. It's really really funny, um, and not with the girl or anything anymore. Been for since probably this movie, but still, that's. But yeah, it was good. There's a lot of. This is also a very quotable movie, by the way, and there's a lot of really funny bits that involve him going because no matter what he does, he always gets hurt in the movie, and something bad happens to him, and so there's a lot of funny bits. Two good comedies come out at the same time. It's kind of cool.
It's kind of and they are drastically different. One being almost Ace Ventura is almost fantastical in comparison, but both of them very good. And again, interesting that you get Gerard Depardieu to show up in American films the way he has, and he had like a run for a while where he was popular.
Yeah, he was huge for a while there. I mean, he had Green Card, of course, with Andy McDowell, and yeah, he's around for a while. I mean, you don't get to see him as much these days, but still, he was popping up in a lot of. You don't think of him as the quintessential romantic comedy guy, but he did a lot of those when he was kind of big in the early '90s, which I thought was kind of funny. But he's not that kind of he's not really not that kind of actor.
Right.
More of a he's more of a quirky, thoughtful kind of. He has really good acting skill as well. So he's popping up, but he's popping up in all these like romantic comedies and everything, and he's not really the quintessential handsome. Richard Gere does a lot of romantic comedies eventually in his career, right? He's got Pretty Woman and Runaway Bride and all these movies, and he's kind of the statuesque, handsome guy that all the girls really really swoon over at some point. Gerard Depardieu is none of that.
That's exactly right. It is an interesting, but he was popular enough that like we knew his name. Like he was in a huge box office draw, but like he was a big box office draw, right? I mean, he did well.
Absolutely.
So
His movies would do great. I mean, they're not $100 million grossers, but they're definitely making money. So that, and like I said, all those movies did really well in secondary markets as well. All those movies did great. My Father the Hero. I liked this movie so much, I went out and rented it when it came out on video. So
there we go. So
yeah.
secondary market for sure. Back to the old game.
Oh yeah.
So rolling into the next week, we got a trio of movies. Interesting to get some thoughts on all of them. I'm excited about. The first one that we have listed here is Blank Check, and because there's multiple movies called Blank Check, I'm going to let Tony carry this because otherwise there's I'm going to go on a Danny Boyle tangent, and that could be totally wrong, which I think it is.
That's not. Yeah, it's this is a this is a comedy that stars Brian Bonsall, who is the kid from who's Andy from Family Ties, the little kid, and he's a little more grown up here now, and he's going to do this movie, and it's going to be about him getting into this like little accident on his with this other guy who kind of drives kind of close to him and hits him, and the guy is a villain, and he was trying to get out of the situation before the cops get there, and so he just hands the kid a blank check, and of course, all the escapades grow from there.
Yeah, was this a Disney made movie? Is this Disney?
Yes.
Or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I remember it just working in the video store. I remember it being, a movie that, and I'm not going to be in the video store for another 2 years, I don't think, but it was one of those ones where it was very popular. And even afterwards, like, I guess a lot of kids connected with it because it was the idea of a kid having suddenly all this money and, that sort of fantasy side of things. And I remember it from that side of it. I don't remember much about the movie. It's pretty straightforward, I imagine. Is there anything that stands out to you about this particular?
I will end up working with a lot of these guys in this movie, like Miguel Ferrer, who's passed away. Um, was a really nice guy. Would work with him. I work with Michael Lerner, who we've talked about in this show, and a buddy of mine would please. He's begging me not to bring up the Michael Lerner story again. Uh, so and but yeah, and again, Tone Loc will appear in another movie because he's in this. I didn't work with him, but he's Mr. 90s, and so why not? He's in all the comedies in the 90s.
I think it's funny that you have Tone Loc, whose musical career is pretty edgy.
Yeah.
It shows up in a kids film, a Disney kids film.
I mean, he's got classic 80s 90s hip hop songs though.
No, they
I
are
mean,
super classic.
yeah. So I mean, it's just and he was funny, and I mean, again, he's in Ace Ventura as well.
Right, right.
It was like he's in all these movies. Yeah, if
1994.
if it was a comedy, Tone Loc was in it.
Well, look, one thing about Tone Loc's voice is there's no denying it. If you know it when you hear it, there's no way around it.
And how many times have I been called Tone Loc over the course of my life?
Oh yeah,
A lot.
yeah, yeah.
Lots.
Yes.
I can't count them all. It's a lot. It's a big number.
Yeah, it's a good bit. Next on deck is a movie that you say we saw together. I don't remember. I remember the movie kind of. I'm going to let you steer it. Haha. This is a movie called The Getaway with who is it? Baldwin. Adam Baldwin. What am I saying? Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger.
Good cast. I mean, Alec Baldwin, Kim Basinger, Michael Madsen, James Woods, Jennifer Tilly. It's a really cool movie. It is a remake, but a really good remake, in my opinion. And you and I did see this movie, and I will say this: you might have been slightly hungover the next day after we saw it. All right.
Oh,
So,
delightful.
but anyway, yeah, it is. It's you and I decide. So the one thing about you and I in our movie going, it's going to come about. You're going to see a trend. Whenever you and I would go do something, or come off of hanging out the night before, or going to the beach house, or whatever it might be, our wind down would involve going to the movies.
That's great.
I don't know what it was, but we'd always be like, "Oh, let's go see so and so. Let's go see this movie. Let's go see that movie." And there's quite a few movies along the way that we're gonna be like, "Oh, we came back from the beach house. We decided to go see this," or
Yeah.
we just came back from. We decided to go do that. I don't know what it was. I guess this is because we've always loved movies. Obviously, we do because we both became filmmakers. But we always would be like to wind down our weekend or our week or whatever. It would be, "Let's go see the movie. Let's go see this. Let's go do that." So. The
The
Getaway is one of them. I love The Getaway, man. I love this movie. Have you seen it in a while?
I have not, and I'm actually putting on the list if I can find it. That is only because I've been watching for another project I was working on. I was watching a lot of car chase and that kind of stuff. And this has, if I'm not mistaken, it has some nice stunt driving and other aspects to it. But again, it's been a while. I just remember when does Pulp Fiction come out?
It's going to come out. It's going to come out in '94. It's going to come out a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is based off the 1972 version of this movie, The Getaway. Yep. But yeah, I mean, and again, it's got some heavy hitters that were part of this. Roger Donaldson directed it, and Walter Hill wrote it, and of course, he does a lot of action. But yeah, I mean, the original Getaway was a classic as well, which I usually hate remaking classics, but the original one had Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw, and it was a big movie that did really well. This one didn't do as well, but it did okay. So, box office wise,
yeah, it's. I'm gonna put it back in my list. I've been going through a bunch of movies lately, and like I've said before, like for anybody that, and this is not for anything more than something I found that helps me, but a lot of times I hate going to the gym and getting on the treadmill, and I just, it's so boring. But I'll tell you what the best thing in the world is. That's the time. Don't watch the news shows. Save those for your home. This is the best time. You're going to stand on this treadmill 20, 30 minutes, whatever it might be, even if it takes you chunks to do it. It's one of the best times in the world to go revisit old movies if you can find them, because you're captive. You're going to pay attention. And if it's not that interesting, it suddenly becomes more interesting, because anything is more interesting than walking on a treadmill or whatever it is you, right? Excuse me. So anyway, so it's worth having a good time. I'm going to actually see if I can find this. I'm going to try and track it down. Sometimes I've been getting lucky on Amazon Prime to find some of these more rare movies, but to your point, they are few and far between.
Yeah, I think this one you could probably find because it did a little bit better at the box office. You know, it did over 30 million and stuff. So I mean, it's when you do better, they tend to keep you around longer. So
It's very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Then we get into a movie that, look, here's my problem with this. I'm going to say the problem first, and then we'll reveal the name, because I think it's more fun. I like to keep people in suspense. The first movie is so good and so heart-wrenching that I've probably cried to that movie
Yeah.
a lot. And because I think every kid, we both have, as kids, unfortunately, I over our time, we've both had loss in our life, and you deal with it in that movie in a special way. And there's just something about it that's really good. The cast is heartwarming. You can't help but fall in love with everybody, and no kind of creepy love, but I mean, just genuinely, like, you feel like you're part of their community. And I just don't know if a sequel to this film should have been made, in my opinion, because it takes away from the beauty of and simplicity of the first one. What we're referring to, or what I'm referring to, Tony may have a completely different opinion, but the movie we're referring to is My Girl 2. And I really want to say Back in the Habit so bad, but that's not the case. is the movie My Girl 2. And yeah, I just didn't do it for me.
So this is why you sometimes wonder why certain movies get created. And this is one of those. The first movie was obviously a brilliant film, and I enjoyed watching it as just as the movie with the cast that was in it. But what they had going for it that made it put it over the top and made it a bigger hit was they had Macaulay Culkin in the film.
Right.
He was big at this time, and people really liked him. And so the first movie was a huge hit because he had star power. And not to say, I mean, you had Dan Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis and these great actors that have star power, but Macaulay Culkin was kind of the it kid at the time. And so his movies were doing well, whether it be, the Home Alone films or Richie Rich or The Good Son or My Girl, like all those movies did well. And of course, if you haven't seen My Girl, he dies in the film. So now you've got Austin O'Brien, who's going to replace him. He's not a box office draw. And so now you're left with, Aykroyd and the relationship between Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis and then Anna Klumsky. Well, Anna Klumsky, in theory, is the star child of the film, but she doesn't have Macaulay Culkin's box office appeal. So it's not going to do nearly as well. It's not going to be a big hit. There's not going to be a lot of My Girls behind it, because I think they finally understood when they released it, this was a cash grab all the time. Not a bad movie. There's a different storyline. It's kind of cool. I mean, she's a little bit older now. It's kind of a coming of age story now and things of that nature. But the first one had this innocence about it that made it so great to watch.
Oh, so I've waited. Again, there's certain movies I wait for my kids. My kids have not had to deal with any sort of death in their life, so I've waited to show them My Girl. But I have daughters, so I've had this list in my brain, or this movie in my brain, to show my girls. I just have a list of movies I can't wait to show them so they can experience and understand it. And Finley's of that age. My youngest is old enough that she'll just figure it out. But Finley's of the age where she would appreciate this because I think she's very close to the same age as the characters in the original My Girl. But I'm not going to waste my time. They're going to go watch My Girl too if they can find it because my kids will just watch whatever. I mean, my kids watch the same movies over and over again because it doesn't bother them. They love sequels. They don't care because they're kids. To them, it's more of the same. They're not being critical on it, although they'll tell you some movies are not as good as others. But I've been waiting to show them to My Girl, but I'm not going to go out of my way to show them My Girl too, only because, like Tony said, it is a cash grab. And it's not, again, I'm not attacking anybody's art.
No.
But I feel like sometimes the impact on a movie, had it been left to a one and done, would have so much more weight and have just so much more momentum behind it that it just makes for a better experience. Just knowing this one movie exists, it's a one-off piece of art, and I wish it would have stayed that way. But we got My Girl too.
There's something kind of cool about certain actors being a sign of the times. I've never been the person that's resigned to be believing that just because I like an actor, that means they have to act for the next 40 years. It doesn't, I don't have a problem with a guy like Macaulay Culkin who came out, released a handful of really fun movies, and then just kind of disappeared. That's okay. It's kind of cool that he released these great movies that were just, left in the 90s.
Right.
Which they're all hits, and you can find all those films very easily because they were all big, and that's okay. Like I don't see why people always get, well, whatever happened to this guy?
Mm-hmm.
He's not doing anything anymore. It's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Sometimes I don't think people realize this industry's hard. This is not an easy industry, and people seem to think that you're supposed to have this lasting star power for decades. In reality is all of our careers in this industry, every single person, not just actors, but people that are behind the camera, all our careers are peaks and valleys. We're on a high some days, and we're on a low the next. And that's the way it always is because you're not always working. And you're going on. You have your life outside of that set. And some people just go, man, and Macaulay did that. He was the same way. I mean, it was man, I just prefer to do this instead of this.
Right.
Instead of being on set for 14 hours a day and getting killed, by the director every day. It's just one of those things. It's not for everybody. Not everybody can do it. And, sometimes you get to the point where I love being able to go to a movie and make a boatload of cash and then take time off. That's one of the reasons I got into the industry to begin with. So I kind of understand it when an actor all of a sudden just kind of disappears or takes time off. I get that thing. There's nothing going on with them that's bad necessarily. It's just that's the way it is. Their star power hasn't necessarily waned or anything else. People come back and forth, back and forth. You'll see, for instance, you take these franchises, and Halloween was a great example.
Yep.
The first ones do so well, and then you have these several movies in there that they keep going down, 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 not doing as well. Then they release these last three, and they're all box office hits, and they're huge, and everyone wants to see them again because people love nostalgia. That's why we like our show. People like our show because people love nostalgia. So it's perfectly fine to be Macaulay Culkin, who dies in My Girl, and we don't necessarily have to have My Girl too. And I love that picture in time.
I would have preferred just armchair quarterbacking. I would prefer it if My Girl 2 comes out 30 years later. And now it's her kids or something. So like you've at least got this, you've progressed the story. Like something really fun in that's much better of a gimmick, to your point. That's the gimmick that I would like to see, not just the instant cash grab, but like, hey, we're going to play on the nostalgia. Here's the gimmick. We're going to throw it back. Here's what it is. And it's like jumping ahead just so you get something else, as opposed to a movie that, it drops 3 years later, 4 years later. it's just not. It's just for me. It's just not the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and
Um,
and the characters and stuff kind of lend itself to there being a sequel. I just feel like you lose the spontaneity and the innocence of those characters by coming back with another one. It just seems weird. I don't know. It may not make sense to other people, but it does in my head. So
oh yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, look, this is a stacked lineup. This is probably got to be one of the hardest Tony's picks that you've done. This is a pretty. I know what's on this list. I know. I'm gonna in my mind play a little game like what will Tony pick? What are your picks for this week? What do you got for us? What should somebody seek out and see?
well, obviously everyone's seen Ace Ventura. Again, if you haven't seen the bigger movies, you need to go watch those. I don't have to tell you to go watch them. You should want to see them. Um, Cabin Boy,
I knew it.
come on, absolutely. And I would say Blink.
Yes.
Cabin Boy and Blink are probably two very different movies, two very different films. Um, but I would say watch those if you can find them. I mean, because to me they're just really they're good movies.
Yeah.
And I again Chris Elliott, kind of that picture in time in the early '90s. It doesn't get any more nostalgia than that. You know what I mean? Because like he's just that guy, and if you love his style of humor with the films like Groundhog Day, he's so perfect in that. He's different here, but he's still that guy. He's got that really quirky humor here, and I really enjoyed it.
Same. Great picks. I 100% endorse this. Great ones to go try and track down and see if you can find them. Good luck to you for Cabin Boy, especially. Blink, you might have a chance. Cabin Boy, you're going to be, you might have to find a VHS player for that bad boy.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are available on Prime. You might have to rent them for a couple bucks. A lot of those are available there, and that's like the only streamer that kind of where you can get them on some of them. And then you can find a lot of these on eBay. I mean, I know we have a lot of listeners who go that route. Like, we'll pay a couple bucks to watch these films on eBay. Have them sent to their house on VHS or DVD, and watch them that way. And our listenership is going up and up and up, and our social media accounts are going up and up and up. So we get a lot of followers now, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's awesome and it's fun. And the bigger part about all of that is we love to interact with you. We love to hear your thoughts. Tony gets a lot of messages. I get some messages. I have friends that listen. Shout out to, and again, we've talked about him before. He sent us a nice big 105, I won't say the address, text the other day saying Happy New Year. And that's our buddy Jim. So
Yep.
shout out to Jim. He comes in later on, but like, it's awesome to have those reconnections, but also to like the new fans that aren't connected to us at all. Like, we value you guys equally. So to us, the fun of all of this is engaging in the conversation. I love talking about it. We love talking about movies. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. Tony knows what he's talking about 100% of the time. So, I mean, on average, you get a 50% good idea. So if you want to join us, you can follow us on all the socials. Tony, if you want to shout those out, I'll give you the last sign off. I'll give you the last word to sign off with, and we will set this puppy free.
Yeah, hit us up on Back for Our Future podcast on Facebook, and of course you can get us on Back for Our Future at gmail.com. And I take all those messages, and I read everything.
There we go. That's it. All right. Well, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you again. I'm just going to close it out as we open it, just for fun. I'm Drew.
I'm Tony.
We'll see you in the future.
Peace.